Welcome to the first 2016 SSP members webinar on the power of emotion and how we decide what to buy. During SSP we obviously talk about the fact that people buy emotionally and justify rationally. You'll recall the buying of a car and all those emotional drivers that go into the reasons why we want the certain cars that we buy. But what is the science behind the emotional buying motive? There's a lot of research that we can't just turn that emotion off. Two great books out at the moment. If you haven't read them already, highly recommend that you go out and buy them. The one here, The Chimp Paradox, you've probably come across. I was listening to Radio 2 the other day, and Chris Evans is a massive fan of this particular book. And both books really talk about how our brains have different parts, different functions, from a rational side to an emotional side, and the conflict that goes on between both of those. So let's take a quick look at the chimp. And very much Dr. Steve Peters, he works with the elite athletes, he worked with the British cycling team, and he very much talks about how we control our inner chimp, as he calls it. He says pretty much that, well, he says there are 5 actual parts of the brain, but there were 3 that he concentrates mainly on. And he says that these parts of the brain start off in our womb, when we're growing inside our mother's womb, as individual brains, and they grow individually. And everything's fine, they all have their own functions, the world is great. And then suddenly, unfortunately, they're all joined together into one brain, and that's when all of the conflict and all of the mess starts to appear. So the 3 that he talks about is A, the frontal brain. You can, if you like, call that the scientist. Objectives are set. It uses logic. It uses fact. It's a conscious decision. I like to think about these 2 things as the conscious side, which is the first one, the frontal brain, the prefrontal cortex, which we'll find out a bit later. And there's the limbic brain. That's the unconscious brain. It's the emotional brain. And Steve Peters talks about the limbic brain being this chimp, this crazy, impetulant beast that runs around and causes mayhem. It was actually Plato who started talking about the difference between the rational side and the emotional side. And he very much thought that great decision makers only base their thoughts on the rational side, on the prefrontal cortex. Okay? He actually said that what we need to do as human beings, as rational people, is to, wherever possible, limit the effect of the emotion. He called them wild animals, beasts that would run away from you. So we had to control that. And I guess in a negative sense, I guess he's kind of right, isn't it? You know, if we feel anger, then often when we act on that anger straight away, it's not particularly our best decision-making process at that time. So if we're caught up in an impulsive purchase, afterwards we may regret that impulsive purchase because maybe our rational brain wasn't quite connected at that time. So I kind of get where he's going, but the research now would indicate that our emotional brain is always making decisions. We can't actually turn the thing off. So it's the way that we actually access our emotional brain is probably the key to making the best decision. So I say we have our limbic brain, and then lastly we have our parietal brain, and that very much is the part of the brain that Steve Peters calls it a computer. It's just a hard drive. It's storing all of our experiences, what's gone on before, so we can access that from an emotional perspective. But that will also probably drive the way that our chimp is behaving, because if actually we know that tapping into our hard drive that this wasn't good in the past, then we may act on that in a certain way. So a great book. I love the sort of analogy of the chimp and the fact that we need to control this chimp. And these are the parts of the brain: the limbic, the parietal, I can never say it, and the frontal. The book that I really want to talk a little bit more about is this one, and this talks a lot about the conflict that's going on, but more importantly, how we can cope with that. I'm going to show you a short video, which is where the author talks a little bit more about his book. So let's give this a go. It's collated by the California Academy of Sciences.
What happens in your brain when you make a decision? How can you make better ones? From choosing a cereal to finding a flight path to safety, science writer Jonah Lehrer tackles decision-making, small and large, in his book, How We Decide.
Whenever you make a decision, there's argument taking place inside your head. And sometimes the argument is between rational areas, like the prefrontal cortex, and between areas like the amygdala or nucleus accumbens, areas that generate these powerful emotions. And so the key in terms of making the right decision is figuring out how to reconcile this argument, which side you should listen to.
Neuroscience shows that successfully choosing a cereal might use the more emotional areas of the brain. But what about life and death decisions?
So there's also a tug-of-war, an emotional argument taking place when you have to make very stressful situations. It's hard to imagine a more stressful situation than being in a cockpit when you lose total engine power over New York City.
70. Yeah, this is Cactus 1539. It bursts your false thrust and focus. You're turning back towards LaGuardia.
The amygdala is automatically turned on, so it starts pumping out these intense feelings of fear and anxiety. And what pilots train to do, when they train to do this in flight simulators, is how to keep a lid on those emotions, how to make sure those emotions don't get out of control until the fear doesn't turn into panic.
Third strike, he lost all engine, he lost the thrust in the engine to returning immediately. Cactus 1529, which engines? He lost thrust in both engines, he said. Got it.
What they practice is the ability to think through those feelings, and that requires the prefrontal cortex, this uniquely human brain area. And so in the case of Captain Sullenberger, what that allowed him to do was to take a deep breath, to realize his fear wasn't going to save him, that his fear wasn't useful. So instead what he had to do was look at his airspeed indicator, his altitude, look how far away the runway in Teterboro, New Jersey was, or whether or not he could return to LaGuardia, and realize that the best decision he could make at that moment was to land on the Hudson. So that was very much a rational decision. In many respects, the brain is like a Swiss Army knife. It's stuffed full of all these different tools, these different ways of thinking. We can rely on the amygdala, or the nucleus accumbens, on the prefrontal cortex, and by using metacognition, we can really tailor this thought process to the task at hand. So, in a sense, learning about how we think can allow us to think better.
Fantastic analogy there. So the brain is like a Swiss Army knife, and obviously we talk a lot on SSP about how we can relate this to our customers. I guess our job as salespeople is to ensure that we allow our customers to access the right part of their Swiss Army knife so that they decide to buy our product. So this is what he was talking about. This is a picture of the brain where we have our prefrontal cortex, that's the rationalizes the feelings and emotions. The amygdala. The amygdala is part of the brain that tries to avoid us from being harmed. It tries to avoid pain. Whereas the nucleus accumbens, that's the part of the brain that generates the pleasurable feelings. So these are our dopamines. And they've done a lot of research that actually we want to get dopamines. It's like a feeling of ecstasy. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. They've done a study on rats that actually, if they just feed them these drugs, these sort of dopamines, that they're so happy. They have such a pleasurable state, is that they don't want to feed, they don't want to drink. In fact, they die from happiness, which is slightly bizarre. So I guess our job as salespeople is how do we actually put our product so desirable that we are creating these dopamines within our customer's brain. It's preventing the amygdala, okay, the pain, and in our world, pain means probably spending money, okay, so that our rational decision is yes, we would like to buy this. It's amazing how our perception of value, obviously in SSP we talk about compelling needs, credible solution, perceived value. The perception of value, there's a nice study whereby they did a wine tasting exercise, whereby they had various different wines. Some were $5 for a bottle of wine, going up to $90, which I'm sure was a very fine wine. And then they wired up a brain scan machine to the logical part of the brain, to the prefrontal cortex. And they presented these different wines and they gave the price tags. The only difference is that they lied about the price of the wines. And what they identified, so for example, they had $5 wine, they priced the same as a $45. A $10 wine is a $90. But the more expensive the wine, the more excited the individual became about that wine. You know, we on the course, of course, spoke about toothpaste. I'm sure you've never walked down the aisle of a supermarket quite the same again. But when we're looking at toothpaste, why is it when £11 toothpaste got an audible gasp when we gave that price? It's because £11 for a toothpaste, wow. But what it also did, I can guarantee whenever we do this exercise, somebody will pick the toothpaste up and have a look at it and go, wow, how is this so great? So already there's a desirable element. Everybody on the course then thinks, oh, I'd quite like that. It's funny that the cheap toothpaste never gets stolen from the courses, but that one often does. So there's a desire around it. It's because of the dopamines are now creating this feeling. But then we want to justify why you spend £11 on it. Let's take a look at branding. They've done the placebo effect, whereby you can take a branded headache tablet versus an unbranded headache tablet, exactly the same product, and you know what I'm going to say. Apparently that one worked, the branded one, but that one didn't. On Coke tests, on Pepsi challenges, they've taken branded Coke and they've taken just a cheap cola type product. And what they've done is that they've asked people, which do you think's the best? And you know what? There's no evidence that would say at that point, the stats would say Coke is no better than any other. When they then show the brand to another set of people and they say, okay, this is Coke, that's a different unbranded cola, which do you prefer? Coke comes out top every single time. Why? Well, it's because of the branding. It's because our placebo effect thinks, do you know what, this is a better product. Our emotions are tricking our rational thought. Let's imagine a scenario. You were on a train. It's quite an unpleasant thought, by the way, but you're on a plane, you're heading down the track, and the train is now a runaway train. And there in front of you are 5 workers on the track. And gosh, if it just carries on, then they're definitely going to die. You can't stop the train quick enough. But you suddenly see that there's a track to the right, which you could flip the switch on. Now there's one work person over there. So your choice is, do you flip the switch and just kill one person, dreadful I know, or do you stay where you are with the 5? What would you do? Normally when this question is asked, the vast majority of people would say, I'd sacrifice the one person for the benefit of the other 5. But let's imagine another scenario. You're not on the train, you're on a bridge looking down at the train. And you can see what's about to happen. This train is about to kill 5 people. But you look to the left of you and there is a very large individual, large enough, suspend the fact that this couldn't happen, but large enough that if you pushed them over the bridge, that would actually stop the train. So you would sacrifice this person for the benefit of the 5 below. What would you do? Most people would go, gosh, I couldn't possibly do that. It's immoral to kill somebody else. That would be outrageous. But surely the same maths apply. It's either 1 versus 5 or 1 versus 5. The difference is that emotional brain, that chimp, is now going, whoa, we can't possibly do that. So it's quite interesting, the emotions, the way that they play on us. Another bit of survey, a guy called Richard Thaler, he said, if you were to go to a movie, and on the way to the movie, you lost the ticket was worth £10, would you buy another ticket? His research says about a half would buy another ticket. Okay, fair enough, because you know what, £20, the one half wouldn't, £20, it sounds expensive. So half of the people wouldn't buy it. 20 quid for a movie ticket, who would want to do that? He did another question, said, on the way to the movie theatre, you didn't lose the ticket, you lost £10. Okay? Because you didn't have the ticket. You were going to buy a ticket for £10. Would you still buy the ticket once you got to the movie theatre? But actually, most people said, yeah, of course I would. I've lost £10, that's unfortunate, but I'd still go and see the movie. So why is it that in the first scenario, half of the people said, no, do you know what, I wouldn't go. I've lost my movie ticket, I'll give up the film. But in the second scenario, exactly the same amount of money is being paid, but they would do. It's because emotionally I've disassociated the £10 with that ticket. Okay? It's only when I combine them together, the inner chimp in me is saying, 20 quid for a ticket? No way. Of course I'm not going to spend that. So very much what we need to do is harness that and understand, I guess, no, hang on, this is irrational. Okay? It makes sense. If I want to go and see the movie, spend the money. So, just really to conclude on all of this, we've got this conscious thought, this logical brain making the decisions, or so we think. Actually, we haven't. There is a war going on between the amygdala and the nuclear accumbens. That's the dopamines. That's the desirable part. That's the bit that says, I want to buy this. This is the bit that's saying, but whoa, look how much it's going to cost me. So salespeople, we need to increase that and we need to limit this so that consciously they decide. How do we do that? Well, they've done again lots of scans and they've actually put probes into the NACC, into the prefrontal cortex, and actually these scientists have proven, they've shown their students, their subjects if you like, products, and they can decide already before they even decide which they were going to buy, based on how much the amygdala is stimulated and how much the NACC is stimulated. Fascinating. They already know before they do which one they're going to buy. So, what do? How do you stimulate the NACC? Your credible solution, your sizzle selling, everything that we speak about on the course, you need to make that product so desirable, matching their needs. It's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't they buy it? If you think about the way department stores, you know, what's at the beginning as you walk in? The most desirable products. It's things to get you engaged. What do they put in shop windows? Things that you would want to buy. So we've got to stimulate the NACC to create those dopamines. However, how do we limit the amygdala? We speak on the program about value tools. Probably one of the best value tool is how do we actually defer payment? Okay, what does a credit card do? A credit card simply defers payment. Now, if you every month were paid in cash, do you think you'd buy half of what you spent? I don't think you would. I don't think you would. If you had a brown envelope with your cash in for a week's hard work, suddenly paying out £100 maybe in that restaurant, maybe I won't. Okay? You put it on a credit card, you know, half of us don't even look at the sum as we're signing. You know why? Because, or putting the chip and pin in, we know why? Because it doesn't feel anywhere near as bad until the bill comes in at the end of the month, of course. Particularly interesting that we're talking about this at the beginning of 2016 with all the money that was just spent before Christmas. Buy now, pay later. Why is it that, you know, all of these sofa sales, you know, don't pay until 2017? Why? 2017, it's a lifetime away. Sales, you know, talking about the fact that, okay, this may be expensive, but if you buy today, scarcity mentality, buy today, this is how much money you can save. The amygdala is saying, okay, that's a lot of money, but look how much I'm saving. It's not as bad as I thought. So using value tools, we really, guys, have to think about how do we keep the amygdala quiet? How do we calm down the inner chimp? How do we create that desire? How do we create the emotion? How do we create the dopamines? How do we get the brain engaged so it's saying, yes, I want this? So that all of that filters up to the rational brain that then says, let's buy this thing. So, I hope you've taken something out of today's webinar. It will be available to download, as usual. Any questions, because this is not today a live webinar, obviously I can't answer questions directly now. But if you have any questions, go on to the SSP forum, whereby myself or any of our colleagues can actually access it, or share the thoughts yourselves. Go on there and guys, share what's going on. So thanks again for your time, as always, and speak to you soon.